The Old West, also known as the Wild West, is one of the most iconic and mysterious eras in American history. It spanned from the early 19th century until the early 20th century, encompassing roughly 80 years. During this time, the western frontier of the United States was characterized by lawlessness, expansion, conflict, adventure, and rapid change. This historical period has been romanticized and mythologized in literature, film, and pop culture, leading to a blend of fact and fiction in the public consciousness. This comprehensive exploration of the Old West aims to demystify the era by examining the historical realities, social dynamics, key events, and individuals that shaped this fascinating chapter of American history. Historical context of the Old West. The Old West began to take shape in the early 1800s, following the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, which doubled the size of the United States and opened up vast territories for exploration and settlement. Before this, the area west of the Mississippi River was largely inhabited by Native American tribes and was under the control of European powers, including Spain, France, and Mexico. The Louisiana Purchase and westward expansion. President Thomas Jefferson's acquisition of the Louisiana Territory from France in 1803 was a pivotal moment. It set the stage for the exploration of the West, spearheaded by the Lewis and Clark expedition from 1804 to 1806, which mapped out a path to the Pacific Ocean and identified new territories ripe for settlement. The concept of manifest destiny, the belief that the United States was destined to expand across the North American continent, emerged during this time and provided ideological justification for westward expansion. This doctrine fueled the migration of settlers and prospectors into the frontier regions, often leading to the displacement of Native American tribes. The Gold Rush era, from 1848 to 1855. A defining event in Old West history was the discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in California in 1848, sparking the California Gold Rush. Thousands of people, known as 49ers, flooded into California in hopes of striking it rich. This sudden influx of settlers transformed the region's economy and society, rapidly turning small towns into bustling hubs of activity. The gold rush not only brought prospectors but also merchants, farmers, and opportunists who sought to profit from the needs of the miners. Gold and silver rushes spread across the West in the following decades, with notable finds in Colorado, Nevada with the Comstock Lode, and South Dakota in the Black Hills. These mining booms led to the establishment of boomtowns, which were often lawless, transient communities that experienced rapid growth, followed by just as rapid declines when the minerals were exhausted. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, stands as one of the most significant developments of the Old West. This engineering marvel connected the eastern United States with the Pacific coast, revolutionizing transportation and commerce. It allowed goods, people, and information to travel across the country in a matter of days rather than months, greatly accelerating the settlement of the West. The railroad also played a crucial role in transforming the economy of the western frontier, facilitating the shipment of agricultural products, cattle, and minerals to eastern markets. However, the railroad's construction was fraught with challenges, including difficult terrain, harsh weather conditions, and conflicts with Native American tribes who saw the railroad as an encroachment on their lands. The Old West encompassed a vast and diverse region that included deserts, mountains, plains, and forests. Its geography shaped the lives of its inhabitants and influenced the patterns of settlement and development. The Great Plains, stretching from Texas in the south to the Canadian border in the north, were a central part of the Old West. Initially considered unsuitable for agriculture, these expansive grasslands became a key area for ranching and farming after the invention of new technologies like steel plows and windmills. Homesteaders, driven by the Homestead Act of 1862, settled in the region, where they were granted 160 acres of land in exchange for cultivating it for 5 years. The plains were also the scene of intense conflicts between settlers and Native American tribes, particularly the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Comanche, who relied on the vast buffalo herds that roamed the region. The near extinction of the buffalo in the late 19th century, driven by commercial hunting and the expansion of railroads, contributed to the decline of Native American cultures in the plains. The Rocky Mountains and Sierra Nevada mountain ranges posed significant obstacles to westward migration. Yet, they also contained rich deposits of minerals, particularly gold and silver, that attracted prospectors and settlers. Towns like Denver, Colorado, and Virginia City, Nevada, grew rapidly during the mining booms, only to shrink when the mines were depleted. The rugged terrain of these regions also provided hideouts for outlaws and bandits, making them notorious for criminal activity during the height of the Old West. The southwestern United States, encompassing modern-day Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Nevada, is characterized by vast deserts and arid landscapes. Despite its harsh environment, the region became a vital part of the Old West, particularly due to its proximity to Mexico and the presence of silver mines. Towns like Tombstone, Arizona, became synonymous with the Old West's lawlessness and were home to famous figures such as Wyatt, Earp, and Doc Holliday. The desert regions also saw significant interaction between Anglo-American settlers and Mexican populations, as well as clashes with Native American groups like the Apache. The Old West is renowned for its larger-than-life characters, many of whom have become legendary through folklore, novels, and Hollywood films. These figures include lawmen, outlaws, pioneers, and Native American leaders, each contributing to the mythology of the Wild West. Outlaws and gunslingers were romanticized figures in Old West history, often depicted as anti-heroes. In reality, many were hardened criminals who terrorized frontier towns and robbed banks, stagecoaches, and trains. Billy the Kid. Perhaps the most famous outlaw, Billy the Kid, born Henry McCarty, was known for his role in the Lincoln County War in New Mexico and his string of killings before being shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett at the age of 21. Jesse James. A former Confederate guerrilla, Jesse James became one of the most notorious bank and train robbers in American history. Along with his brother Frank, he led the James Younger Gang, which was responsible for a series of violent robberies in the 1870s. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Leaders of the Wild Bunch Gang, Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were famous for their string of bank and train robberies across the western United States. Their exploits became legendary, culminating in their escape to South America, where they reportedly continued their criminal careers. While outlaws captured the public's imagination, lawmen were often tasked with bringing order to the lawless frontier. Some lawmen, like Wyatt Earp, have achieved legendary status, while others worked in relative obscurity. Wyatt Earp. A former lawman in towns like Dodge City and Tombstone, Earp is best known for his involvement in the gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881. This shootout between Earp, his brothers, and Doc Holliday against the Clanton-McClory gang became one of the most famous events of the Old West. Wild Bill Hickok. Known for his skills as a gunslinger, Hickok was also a lawman and Union spy during the Civil War. He served as a marshal in Abilene, Kansas, and was famously shot and killed while playing poker in Deadwood, South Dakota, holding what is now known as the dead man's hand, aces and eights. Bat Masterson. Another iconic lawman, Masterson worked as a sheriff and marshal in Dodge City and later became a journalist and sports writer in New York City. He was a friend of Wyatt Earp and was involved in numerous shootouts during his time as a lawman. The expansion of settlers into Native American lands led to numerous conflicts known collectively as the Indian Wars. Native American leaders fought to defend their territories and preserve their way of life against the encroaching forces of the US government and settlers. Sitting Bull. A Hunkpapa Lakota chief, Sitting Bull is best known for his role in the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, where he and a coalition of Native American tribes defeated General George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry. Sitting Bull's resistance to U.S. expansion made him a symbol of Native American resistance, though he was eventually killed by Indian Agency police in 1890. Geronimo. A leader of the Apache, Geronimo led a series of raids against Mexican and American forces in the Southwest for decades. His ability to evade capture and his fierce resistance made him a legendary figure in both American and Native American history. He eventually surrendered to U.S. forces in 1886. Crazy Horse. A key leader of the Oglala Lakota, Crazy Horse played a significant role in the resistance against U.S. military forces during the Indian Wars. Alongside Sitting Bull, he was instrumental in the defeat of General Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Crazy Horse's tactical brilliance and fierce dedication to defending his people made him one of the most respected Native American leaders of the time. He was captured by U.S. troops in 1877 and tragically killed while in custody. In addition to outlaws, lawmen, and Native American leaders, the Old West was shaped by countless pioneers and settlers who migrated westward in search of new opportunities. These individuals often faced harsh conditions, including extreme weather, disease, and conflicts with Native American tribes, but their perseverance helped shape the cultural and economic landscape of the western United States. Daniel Boone, although his primary exploits occurred before the height of the Old West era, is an early icon of frontier exploration. His expeditions through the Appalachian Mountains and the Kentucky wilderness set the stage for future western expansion. Kit Carson, an explorer, scout, and mountain man, was one of the most well-known figures of the frontier. He was instrumental in guiding settlers across the Rocky Mountains and served as a guide for John C. Fremont's expeditions. Carson also played a significant role in the U.S. military campaigns against Native Americans during the 1840s and 1850s. Brigham Young, a religious leader and pioneer, led the Mormon migration to Utah in the 1840s. After facing persecution in the eastern U.S., the Mormons established a settlement in the Salt Lake Valley, where they built a thriving community. Young's leadership helped transform the Utah Territory into a vital part of the expanding western frontier. The Old West is often remembered for its violent nature, and while some of the stories have been exaggerated, conflict was indeed a central part of life in the frontier. The clash of cultures, the lawlessness of boomtowns, and the vastness of the untamed wilderness all contributed to the region's notorious reputation. The Indian Wars were a series of conflicts between the U.S. government and various Native American tribes as settlers encroached on their lands. These wars spanned several decades, from the early 19th century until the late 19th century, and were marked by numerous battles, massacres, and forced relocations. The Trail of Tears in the 1830s was one of the most infamous episodes in Native American history. It refers to the forced relocation of several tribes, including the Cherokee, from their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States to designated Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Thousands of Native Americans died during the journey due to disease, starvation, and exposure. The Sand Creek Massacre in 1864 was a brutal attack that occurred in Colorado when a group of Colorado Territory militia attacked a peaceful encampment of Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, killing over 150 Native Americans, most of them women and children. The massacre was widely condemned, but it fueled further conflicts between Native American tribes and U.S. settlers. The Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876 is perhaps the most famous battle of the Indian Wars. This encounter saw the forces of General Custer's 7th Cavalry decisively defeated by a coalition of Lakota Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. Custer and his men were killed in what became known as Custer's Last Stand. Although it was a significant victory for Native Americans, it ultimately led to increased military efforts to subdue the Plains tribes. Range wars and feuds. As settlers moved west, disputes over land and resources often led to violent confrontations, particularly in areas where cattle ranching and farming competed for territory. These conflicts, known as range wars, typically involved cattle barons, homesteaders, and small-time ranchers. The Johnson County War of 1892 was one of the most notorious range wars. It occurred in Wyoming when wealthy cattlemen, angered by small-time ranchers and homesteaders, hired gunmen to eliminate them. The violence escalated, culminating in a large-scale shootout that required federal intervention. The Lincoln County War of 1878 was centered around economic and political control of Lincoln County in New Mexico. It involved rival factions of businessmen and ranchers, with both sides employing hired guns. Notable figures like Billy the Kid were involved in this violent feud, which resulted in multiple deaths. Gunfights and lawlessness. The image of quick-drawing gunslingers facing off in dusty streets has become one of the defining characteristics of the Old West. While many of these legendary gunfights have been embellished, gun violence was a reality in many frontier towns. The gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881 is perhaps the most famous shootout in Old West history. Taking place in Tombstone, Arizona, it pitted lawman Wyatt Earp, his brothers, and Doc Holliday against the Clanton and McClory factions. The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds, but it became a symbol of the Old West's violent and lawless nature. Dodge City, Kansas, was one of the most notorious cowtowns of the Old West, known for its saloons, brothels, and frequent shootouts between cowboys and lawmen. Lawmen, like Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp, worked to maintain order in this rough-and-tumble town, but violence was a frequent occurrence. In the southwestern United States, particularly in Texas and Arizona, outlaw groups known as bandidos engaged in violent robberies and clashes with law enforcement. These groups, often composed of Mexican and American outlaws, contributed to the overall perception of the West as a lawless and dangerous place. Economic and social development. Despite its reputation for violence and lawlessness, the Old West was also a place of significant economic and social development. The arrival of settlers, miners, and entrepreneurs transformed the region from a vast wilderness into a burgeoning part of the United States. The cattle industry and the cowboy culture. One of the most enduring symbols of the Old West is the cowboy, and the cattle industry was a cornerstone of the Western economy. Large cattle ranches were established across the Great Plains and the Southwest, and cowboys played a vital role in herding and driving cattle to market. Cattle drives. Cattle drives were long, arduous journeys that involved moving thousands of cattle from Texas and other western states to railheads in Kansas, where they would be shipped to eastern markets. Cowboys faced harsh weather, rough terrain, and the constant threat of cattle rustlers, making the job both dangerous and demanding. The Chisholm Trail. One of the most famous cattle trails, the Chisholm Trail ran from Texas to Kansas and was used by cowboys to drive cattle to railheads in cities like Abilene and Dodge City. The trail became a symbol of the cattle industry and the rugged lifestyle of the cowboy. The Open Range. During the late 19th century, much of the western United States was characterized by the open range, where cattle roamed freely across vast, unfenced areas. However, the introduction of barbed wire in the 1870s revolutionized the cattle industry, as ranchers began fencing off their land to protect their livestock. This shift led to the decline of the open range and the end of the large-scale cattle drives. Mining and resource extraction. The discovery of precious metals, including gold and silver, was a driving force behind westward migration. Mining booms led to the establishment of numerous towns and cities, but the industry also had significant environmental and social impacts. The Comstock lode discovered in Nevada in 1859, the Comstock lode was one of the richest silver deposits in the world. It attracted thousands of prospectors and led to the rapid growth of towns like Virginia City. The Comstock lode was a major economic engine for the region and contributed to the overall prosperity of the western United States. Boom towns and ghost towns. Mining towns often experienced rapid growth, followed by equally rapid decline once the resources were depleted. Boom towns like Tombstone, Arizona, and Deadwood, South Dakota, thrived during the height of mining activity, but many became ghost towns when the mines were exhausted, leaving behind abandoned buildings and empty streets. Environmental impact. The extraction of minerals had a significant environmental impact on the western landscape. Mining operations caused deforestation, erosion, and pollution of water sources. Additionally, the influx of settlers and miners disrupted Native American communities and contributed to the displacement of indigenous peoples. Farming and agriculture. Farming played a critical role in the development of the Old West, particularly after the passage of the Homestead Act of 1862, which granted settlers 160 acres of land in exchange for cultivating it for 5 years. Homesteaders. The Homestead Act attracted thousands of settlers to the western frontier, where they faced the challenges of farming in an often harsh and unforgiving environment. Many homesteaders struggled to make a living due to poor soil, droughts, and extreme weather, but others thrived and helped establish permanent communities. Irrigation and water management. In the arid regions of the West, particularly in the Southwest, irrigation and water management were essential for successful farming. Settlers constructed dams, canals, and aqueducts to divert water from rivers for agricultural use, transforming the landscape and making farming possible in areas that would have otherwise been unsuitable for cultivation. This innovation was especially crucial in states like California and Arizona, where large-scale agricultural development contributed to the long-term success and settlement of the region. Railroads and the growth of towns. The expansion of the railroad system was one of the most transformative forces in the Old West. Railroads connected remote parts of the West to the rest of the country, facilitating the movement of goods, people, and ideas. Towns that developed along railroad lines often prospered, becoming major hubs of commerce and trade. The first Transcontinental Railroad, 1869. Completed by the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads, the Transcontinental Railroad linked the eastern United States with California, making it possible to travel from coast to coast in a matter of days rather than months. This not only sped up the movement of goods and people, but also fueled further westward expansion by making the West more accessible to settlers. Railroad towns and boom towns. As the railroad expanded, towns such as Abilene, Kansas, and Laramie, Wyoming grew rapidly. Some towns like Dodge City became famous for their saloons and rowdy reputation as cowboys brought cattle in for shipment to eastern markets. These towns often experienced booms as key transit points, but could decline as rail routes changed or resource supplies dwindled. Economic impact. Railroads played a key role in the economy of the Old West by opening up new markets for agricultural goods and mineral resources. Farmers and ranchers could now send their crops, cattle, and goods to markets in the East, fueling the growth of the Western economy. Town life and social structures. Though the image of the Old West often focuses on the rough, untamed wilderness, towns and cities were essential to the economic and social life of the region. These towns, which ranged from small outposts to bustling cities, offered opportunities for business, entertainment, and social interaction. But they also had their fair share of crime and lawlessness. Saloons. Saloons were central to the social life of many Western towns, serving as gathering places for cowboys, miners, settlers, and travelers. These establishments were not just places to drink. They often provided meals, entertainment, and even services like gambling and prostitution. The saloon culture contributed to the rowdy image of the West and was often a flashpoint for violence. Churches and schools. As towns became more established, religious institutions and schools began to emerge, reflecting the desire of settlers to build more permanent and orderly communities. Many Western towns founded schools and churches, which played a role in stabilizing the transient population and promoting the growth of families. Gender roles. Life in the Old West also shaped the roles of women and men in different ways than in the more settled eastern United States. Women, especially in isolated rural areas, often worked alongside men in farming, ranching, and other hard labor. They also played essential roles as business owners, teachers, and community leaders in frontier towns. Some women became famous for defying traditional gender norms, such as Calamity Jane and Annie Oakley, whose skills with firearms and riding challenged the male-dominated culture of the frontier. Diversity in the West. The Old West was one of the most diverse parts of the United States in the 19th century. Mexican Americans, African Americans, Chinese immigrants, and Europeans all contributed to the development of the region. For example, many Chinese laborers were crucial in building the western section of the Transcontinental Railroad, while Mexican vaqueros, or cowboys, played a key role in shaping the cattle industry and cowboy culture. African Americans also made significant contributions, including the establishment of Buffalo Soldiers, who served in the U.S. Army to protect settlers and fight Native American tribes. The American West has long been romanticized and mythologized, both in the United States and abroad.